What is going on, guys? So I got a big show for you this time. This particular show happened on the 13th of July in Saint-Martin-d'Air, which is a town next to Grenoble. This is the shoot site, a nice open football field without any trees or obstacles to worry about. First step is to place all the mortar racks in their corresponding spot. Strategically placing everything simplifies cable management. Since we didn't write this particular show, we heavily relied on the layout sheet that was provided to us. And using the good old steel rod daisy chain method you may have seen in my other videos, we were able to secure the racks in no time. Although it doesn't look very rigid, you'd be surprised to see how well these racks are held in place. I mean, think about it, for one of those racks to tip over, it would have to bend at least 2 1/4-inch thick steel rods. I mean, the company has been using this method for dozens of years without the slightest incident. Taking a look at some lovely 2-inch titanium salutes. These are used to warn the audience that the show is about to start. Here's how we set off one shell at a time on a rack using only one igniter. This flat yellow fuse is called quick match. In good conditions it can burn up to 100 feet per second, so the flame pretty much travels through it instantly. This cylindrical fuse, however, is Chinese time fuse that burns at about 1 centimeter per second. This means that by hooking up each shell to a time fuse cut to different lengths and by igniting all the fuses at the same time, each shell will be set off after a specific delay. My favourite part is of course loading the shells in the mortars. So when you load your shells, you want to look out for a few things. Of course, you want to make sure that the bottom of the tube is completely dry. You want to make sure you're not leaning on top of the mortars for obvious reasons, and you want to make sure that they are loaded all the way down the tube by listening for that little thump. It's very easy for a shell to get lodged somewhere in the middle. That would result in a low break. To try and keep everything nice and tidy, it's always a good idea to shove the extra fuse from the shell down the tubes. This also protects it from hot debris. Next, the fuses need to be taped to the rack. This is because when the shells lift up, they will pull on the fuse and could disconnect the other shells. This is what we have so far. Next up, the wiring. This show will be set off electronically. Every electric match needs to be hooked up to its corresponding cue. Since we only had 3 modules to cover the entire setup, the cues had to be connected with this wire. Using a hammer just makes it easier to unwind it from the reel. Each module needs to be hooked up to the 2 main firing consoles. This is as simple as they get, basically just a good old nail board with a fire button. These are powered by 45-volt battery packs. The reason why the voltage is so high is because we need to overcome the resistance value of those long wires. For every 10 meters of wire, you drop around 1 volt, and each electric match needs at least 2 volts to fire properly. So 45 volts would allow us to use a maximum of 430 meters of wire, which is plenty. Since we had a few hours before showtime, I thought I would give you a little walk around. Here we have some nice candle packs. These are 10mm, so fairly small, but each pack I believe contains 56 shots, so quite nice when you want to create a wall of comets. Just line up a few of these and you're good to go. We tilted them to get a nice crossover pattern. Since we need to set off 3 at the same time, we hooked them up in series. Here's a little strain relief knot to prevent damage if someone trips over the wire or something. That's why the wire is white, by the way, it just makes it more visible in the dark. Here's the first half of the main body of the show. These are 30mm fan cakes from Jacques Prévot. This one here shoots gold mines to red comets. Again, a little strain relief knot. Every cake has its own electric match already inserted. These larger ones are gaffer taped to 2 steel rods which have been hammered in the ground. The aluminium sheets jammed underneath the cakes are to protect them against humidity rising up from the grass, but also to shield the grass from the heat, as these cakes sometimes catch fire after being set off. These smaller cakes are taped to these pre-made boards with L brackets screwed into them. These are super convenient and they allow us to install a bunch of cakes in no time. Next up, the bigger candles. These are 40mm. We secured these simply by tying them to wooden frames that can conveniently be slid into a candle rack. They need to be set off in pairs, so again, one electric match per candle connected in series. These plastic caps just protect the candle from rain and hot debris. And you can see the quick match going down there to ignite the first shot. Here's the main module, so everything's hooked up to its corresponding cue, as you can see. This cable is hooked up to the main firing console all the way down there. Every single wire is tied to this rod to, again, act as a strain relief, because if one of us trips over a wire and disconnects everything 2 minutes before the show, things get a little complicated. And back here we have the mortar racks. These are the salutes. So here's the second half of the main body of the show, just some 3-inch shells hooked up to those time fuse delays, so that one goes off every 3 to 5 seconds. Most of these racks go off individually. However, this one, for instance, is hooked up in series with this rack over here. I'm guessing these will go off right before the finale, as, you know, you want to speed things up a bit near the end. Back here we have the bigger shells. These are 4-inch. Here's a nice V-shaped rack. This one will be part of the finale. Now take a look at this. Instead of the electric match being directly inserted into the quick match, it ignites this long piece of time fuse, which would then ignite the 2 shells at the same time. This was done so that we could spare a cue on the firing console and have 2 completely separate items fire one after the other with only one push of a button. With a more fancy firing system like a Cobra, this wouldn't need to be done, but here we're keeping it old school. As usual, to protect the shells from rain and hot debris, we always cover up the racks with thick aluminium foil. We don't need to remove these before the show. The shells shoot right through the foil, no problem whatsoever. Now for the finale. Most of the racks over here need to go off at the same time, so again, we hook them up in series. Over here we have another firing module, super fancy. Some more 30mm cakes. These two are really nice. They shoot gold Kamuros, I believe. They shoot at a really high pace as well, like 3 shots a second. So we usually use these for the finale. And the final boom! We loaded 3 5-inch Kamuro shells in here, so it should look really nice. Also, these are the nicer tubes. They're made of cardboard. All the other tubes are fiberglass. I don't like those ones as much, since in the event of a flower pot, so a shell blowing up inside the tube, these fiberglass tubes tend to send shrapnel all over the place, whereas the cardboard ones won't be nearly as dangerous. I know in the US they often use HDPE plastic, which is even better. But for some reason, I've never seen anyone use HDPE mortar tubes here in France, which is a real shame. Some smaller cakes, gaffer tape to these L brackets. Even more 30mm cakes. These 4 cakes are mirrored, so we have an identical board over there. The cakes are, of course, hooked up in series. This just gives the effect a nice spread and covers more space up in the sky. You know, it's always a real shame to have everything crowded in one spot and to just shoot everything straight up, especially if you have a large enough shoot site. And the cakes are of course hooked up in series. Since this is a Pyromusical, we needed to set up the sound system. And this is a fairly beefy system as well. We have 4 Yamaha DXS18s and 4 Yamaha DXR15s. This is a 6 kilowatt system in total. We spread them out evenly to cover as much space as we could. Now that everything had been wired up, it was time to test continuity. We use an ohm meter for this, and the more electric matches you have hooked up in series and the longer the wire used, the higher the resistance should be. By knowing how many electric matches and how much wire is hooked up to each cue, we can quickly tell if something isn't right with the measured resistance value. Here are some final shots of the setup. And it's showtime, so enjoy the show.
Voilà. Allez, allez, cool. Est-ce que ça pète, oh, ça fait du bruit, hein. Ouais.
Alors, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Attention.
Il y en a qu'une qui est partie là. Merde. magnifiques ceux-là.
rattraper.
C'est bon, on va te rattraper dans la principale.
Tu vois, arrête les retombées là, c'est ça qui crame l'herbe. Yes.
J'adore.
Ouais, elles sont magnifiques celles-là.
C'est un bureau chaud ça.
Ouais.
Généralement c'est lui qui brûle. Top à la 24. La 25.
Carré.
Regarde celle-là. Oh, c'est des palmiers.
Ouais.
Je pensais à plus fort que ça.
Mais non.
C'est nous. C'est nous.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that. We had a very successful shoot. Every single item went off. And now for the not so fun part, which is cleaning up all this mess. Cakes and candles are not reusable, so we just chuck them in the bin. The mortar racks, however, need to be cleaned out and put back in the truck for future use. And there you have it. So if you liked the video, leave a like, leave a comment maybe. If you have any questions, leave them below and I'll do my best to answer them. And I shall see you guys next time.